Hey guys, this episode of Fall Obsession Podcast is brought to you guys in partnership with Hoot Camo, Bear River Archery, Tacticam Reveal, and the Outdoor Call Radio app. If you guys want to get some exclusive discount codes that these partners have put together for our Fall Obsession Podcast listeners, then go to the episode description on this episode, wherever you are listening, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Carbon TV, whatever it might be, and you will find that code there to save some money with some of these partners. Be sure you guys are following the show wherever you are listening, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and give us a like on social media. We always appreciate that support from you guys. I am your show host, Sam Thrash. Thanks for sticking with me for another episode. You guys are listening to Fall Obsession Podcast.
The power lies within that middle ground.
Hunting transformed my life.
I think you have to be built somewhat different.
That Del Brisby's a super puncher.
We need to get Pop-Tarts on the next Walmart order. I'm serious.
Because to come into this country and stay dedicated to that, it was pretty awesome.
If it's only for one, then you've done your job.
We have to do what's right for the wildlife, and that's our responsibility as hunters.
Fall Obsession Podcast.
Welcome, everyone, to another Fall Obsession Podcast episode. My name is Sam Thrash. I'm your host, and thanks for tuning in with me on this Saturday afternoon. If you're joining on the live stream, this is a first for me. So we have done live shows pretty frequently here lately with our Fall Obsession Podcast guests, and then in the past, I have also done some solo episodes talking about some specific topics that are on my mind at the time. This is my first time combining the two. This is my first time doing a live solo podcast. So definitely have some substantial topics that I want to discuss and address. And I'm hoping that if anybody is joining and using their time this Saturday afternoon to watch the live podcast, that you guys engage in the chat section and comment, discuss. Let's have a conversation during this episode. I'm more than looking forward to that if you're so inclined. But like my solo podcasts in the past have done, I've wanted to be intentional with them. I haven't wanted just to get on here to have a filler episode to just get us by week to week. I've wanted to make sure that we used our time wisely and we actually had some substantial things that we wanted to talk about and that were important to talk about as hunters and outdoors men and women. So and you guys know the agenda for my solo podcast in the past has always been more focused on wildlife conservation, hunting rights, hunting bans, anti-hunters, everything in that world. And there has certainly been a lot going on in that world as of late that warrants our attention. And I've been doing these solo podcasts for quite a while now. Actually, I think I'm probably coming up on it's been about 100 episodes or so since the first time I did this. So it's like I said, it's always been intentional, always been direct, and always had a purpose. And I'm kind of excited about this one because while we have put a lot of focus on our shows, whether it's just me on here doing a solo or with a specific and designated guest, put a lot of focus on other states, other regions of the country, or even the world, and wildlife conservation and the North American model and the attacks on that. This time, I'm able to apply it to my own state. And I'm a Texan. I live in North Texas, for those of you who don't know. And a lot of the questions and a lot of the perspective that I have come from in the past has always been, well, I'm a non-resident over this given issue in Colorado or Idaho or Washington or Oregon, whatever the case might be. How does it affect me as a non-resident? And one of the things that I've always circled back around to is that if you're not standing up for somebody else in their state and a given issue that's important to them, then when it comes to your state, there's going to be no one there to support you, no one there to put a spotlight on you and what's going on in your backyard. So for this episode, while I'm sure the conversation will deviate in a couple of ways to some other states and some other topics, the meat of this conversation is going to focus on Texas, because now, in my humble opinion, there is a very relevant issue in the state of Texas. And it's not something that is as blatantly obvious as an Oregon Peace Act, or somebody trying to infringe upon a state or an individual's right to hunt and fish. This is more centered around kind of that fear that we all have that slowly our ranks of government, slowly our layers of our fish and game departments are going to be infiltrated, and everything is going to start being chipped away. And that's happening in Texas. This all started when I got sent a Facebook post by a gentleman named uh, Jeremy Harrison. And I have actually even reached out to Jeremy and made contact with him. And my hope is that I can actually have him on the show as a guest at some time in the future. It hasn't happened yet, but I'm still optimistic that we can achieve that and make that happen. But his post started with this quote. I'm not trying to steal it from him. I'll give him all the credit. The post started with, "Wolves are not at the gate. They are in the Texas Parks and Wildlife Administration." And so Jeremy's post goes on to um, give some personal history. He's pretty involved in a significant sense with predator control and everything here in Texas. And I won't get into the weeds on that. Again, I would hope to have him on the show and he can share his own story. But he starts sharing a personal experience from several years ago with a lady named Pamela Hart. And Pamela Hart is a very known anti-hunting activist, animal lover. She fits all of the criteria to fall into those camps that we're all too familiar with if you've been paying attention to other states like Colorado, etc. So her husband, Will Hart, they are both tied to some very well-known anti-hunting organizations that bear a cloak of, wildlife protection, wildlife conservation, Project Coyote being one among some others. And uh, they were even named the 2025 Conservationists of the Year from the Corpus Christi Rotary Club in Texas. Um, and I'll dive into that here in a second and my personal thoughts on that. But um, Will Hart, he is on the executive committee for the Texas Parks and Wildlife Foundation. So already right out of the gate, we have a known activist, even a known activist couple who are anti-hunting, and the husband of that couple is in a position where he has influence on a state wildlife agency. Sound familiar? I'm thinking of Colorado. And again, we're talking Texas here. So this already it smells fishy from the get-go, right? So Pamela has been involved in producing various videos over the years with filmmakers, all with the underlying call to action message that we would expect from anti-hunting groups and animal rights activists and all that kind of stuff. So very open about her opposition to hunting and putting the persona of animal cruelty on it and that kind of stuff. So again, there's no trying to hide it. There's no trying to be fishy about it. It's out there for everybody to see. And I'm going through some of my own research that I've done on this matter and just wanting to, I'm not trying to roast people, but I'm trying to bring this to light for everybody's own knowledge. And you guys can go do your own research. You can verify what I'm saying. And you might even be able to dig up more info than what I have. But a couple years ago, Pam Hart and another lady named Patricia Harvison, they petitioned the Texas Parks and Wildlife to regulate mountain lion harvests. And this has been something that has kind of been poking its head up every now and then in the Texas Parks and Wildlife world as far as mountain lions, because right now mountain lions in the state of Texas, they're not even really listed as a game animal. So hunting, trapping, all of the above, it is They're just considered predators. So you can do it. And even several years ago, I think back to a podcast that I'm not sure if I have the number correct, but I believe it was all the way back in episode 136 when I sat down with my neighbor, Mike Behrens, here in Texas, did an in-person podcast, and we actually talked about this. We actually talked about the the mountain lions in Texas, and at the time, what I believe was the same petition trying to impose a regulation on harvests. So it's very interesting me now reading about all this and doing some research on this and realizing, oh man, even back then, this was a conversation we were having. That conversation being, if they impose a season, if they make them a game animal, if they impose trapping regulations, if they, you name it, the list goes on. At what point do they start taking more and more, right? So going back to a couple years ago, these two ladies petitioned the Texas Parks and Wildlife to regulate mountain lion harvest. And here's another interesting tie behind the curtain. I mentioned Patricia Harvison. Patricia's husband, Lewis, is the director of Borderlands Research Center, which is an organization that is responsible for most of the research that Texas Parks and Wildlife gets their grants for. So abbreviated BRI, if you start digging deeper, they seem to have some anti-hunting ties. So again, the spider web just continues the farther and farther that you follow it. And we're seeing more and more of this kind of anti-hunting agenda that certain individuals are tied to behind the curtain, even within the higher up positions of the Texas Parks and Wildlife. Um, the Texas Parks and Wildlife Executive Director, and I am terrible with names, guys, and I do apologize if I butcher this, but David Joshowitz, he's the executive director. For 15 years prior to him being in this position, he worked for Will and Pamela Hart. So the director of Texas Parks and Wildlife, the one of the greatest and biggest hunting states in America, I would say. Um, he has previously worked for an extended period of time for a very influential anti-hunting couple that has previously and is currently using their money to try and slowly regulate hunting away, slowly chip away at that thing that, in the same way that we've seen it done in Colorado and Washington and Oregon and these other states that are currently kind of the front runners in the conservation battlefield, right? So we're we're seeing all of these ties and everything, or at least they're there for you to see if you want to pay attention. But that's the thing. I don't know that anybody is paying attention because folks think of Texas, you think of deer hunting, you think of hog hunting, you think of predator hunting, you think of all of these various things. You don't really think of it being in the same boat or the potential to be in the same boat as um, these other states that are, like I said, in the spotlight. So the ties are all there. The infiltration has begun, and even if there's no relevant actions necessarily that are currently taking place within the commission or within, certainly not from a ballot box standpoint like Colorado is seeing, right? Um, Even if there's nothing like that happening, the stage is being set, if you will. The stage is being set for Texas to be subject to all of our rights as hunters and different regulations to start being chipped away like we've seen happen in other states, right? The Hart family, the Harvisons, even the director of the TPW, they all have those ties. They all have the ties in the higher up positions of TPW, and we need to pay attention because otherwise it's going to sneak up on us like we've never seen before in this state. So what do we do? That's the ultimate question, right? The question of what do we do about this? Um, So I'm going to give you guys a little bit of background for those who aren't familiar with how the uh, Texas Parks and Wildlife Game Commission is appointed, how all this kind of stuff works in our state. Give you guys a little bit look behind it. I encourage you to pay attention to this, not just to educate yourself as a general listener if you are in another state on how it works here, but also, especially if you are a Texas resident, you need to know how this works. Because if you don't know how this works, then you don't know how to hold these people accountable. And that is very, 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 very important. So, um, Texas has 9 seats on its commission for the Texas Parks and Wildlife. And these individuals are appointed by the governor and confirmed by the state Senate. And they serve staggered 6-year terms. So we as the general public, we as the voters in the state of Texas, we do not have a direct way to influence necessarily who is on this commission. It comes down to us trying to influence our politicians that we elect into their respective offices. And then that commission of 9 individuals, they are the ones who appoint the executive director of the Texas Parks and Wildlife. So, not an uncommon model that is, not present in other states, for example, but again, one that doesn't have as much control for the people, right? Because ultimately the governor has a say. And regardless of what you think of Governor Greg Abbott, good or bad or indifferent, or any other person that has previously held that seat or that might hold that seat in the future, you can't ignore the fact that at some point there's politics being played, right? Certain individuals get on commissions and boards like this because they play the political game. And this goes back to just a general context for hunting and conservation. And what do we do? And that is we hold these people accountable. We take action. We actually um, write and call and give these people our perspective as voters. I had a guest on the podcast not that long ago, it was last year, and he was talking about this. This was back during the big public lands crisis, if you will, um, where Senator Mike Lee from Utah was trying to sell off public lands and that whole controversy. But that was in the end viewed as, or in my opinion, viewed as a win for science-based wildlife management and the protection of our public lands. Because we saw an entire hunting community, millions of people use the power of social media to spread the word, to tell people and educate people on how to contact their representatives. And then they took action. They actually called, they actually emailed, and the lines were flooded in our state officials' offices, our federal officials' offices as well, with our opinions, probably some very educated and very well articulated, and equally as much, probably some pretty hot and heavy opinions, but nonetheless, opinions about what was happening and what the voters thought that our politicians should do about this matter. And what do we see happen? We saw senators start pulling their support from Mike Lee's bill. We saw a shift in the political landscape because people were like, whoa, we just rattled a hornet's nest. And that goes to show the power of the American people. I got off on a little bit of rabbit trail, but the guest I had on last year, he spoke in that podcast about how, or I can't remember if it was in the show or in a conversation after, but he mentioned that um, all it takes ultimately is 10 phone calls to a given senator's office about a given issue, the same issue, and it's normally going to be enough to start having him or her start questioning and second guessing their stance if it's opposing the viewpoint of these callers. Um, and the reason that that number is so low is because so few people do it anymore. We're seeing fewer and fewer people voting, especially in local elections, I believe. And because of that, um, 10 phone calls into a senator's office about a public lands issue, 10 phone calls to the governor's office about what one of your TPW commissioners is doing or saying or who he's affiliated with, um, that that has a bigger impact than some people might realize. Again, because so few people are calling, that number of phone calls is able to rattle the cage just enough to get their attention. And that's pretty powerful, in my opinion, because that just goes to show right now it does not take a lot to have your voice heard because so few people out there are doing the same thing. So, um, now in regards to our Texas Parks and Wildlife Commission, I'm not trying to bash them in this podcast. And while there certainly are some things that I believe personally, whether it has to do with predator control, or deer hunting or any of it, there are some things that I think they could do better. I don't believe that there is just this like everything that they're doing, every action, every petition, everything that they're have coming down the pipe right now is focused on anti-hunting agenda. And I'll go back to the mountain lion thing, and I'll use that as an example because we've seen something happen within just the last week or two here in Texas. Um, it was last week or the week before, Texas Parks and Wildlife pulled the pulled a petition from their upcoming commission meeting agenda for mandatory mountain lion harvesting. I believe it was reporting. There were many people that were opposed to this, but it wasn't from a standpoint that they were worried about having to report mountain lion harvest. It was more about being concerned and a worry for what might come as a result of it. Um, so and I'll get into this a little bit. I've put together some notes on the matter just to help guide my own thoughts and everything. So if you see me bouncing around here, tune in on the live or watching the video, that's what I'm doing. But like I mentioned earlier, the mountain lions are not classified as a fully regulated game species statewide. They're considered non-game in most of the state of Texas. And further management practices for mountain lions in Texas, they come from local authorities, like counties, basically. And most of our mountain lions that are going to be regulated in any extent, or certainly the counties where they have a focus on this, are going to be more kind of in the West Texas area. Um, so they're subject to limited statewide harvest regulation authority compared to deer or turkey. So the TPW staff, they're generally pretty careful about expanding reporting mandates without clear statutory authority or a commission established framework. Um, so this mandate on harvest reporting was coming from a standpoint of data collection. But the concerns and a lot of the feedback they were getting was coming from ranchers, West Texas landowners, predator control operators, and then some stakeholders as well. Um, but the fear that was behind that was that reporting requirements like this, a statewide structure for that from the TPW would end up resulting in later on down the road, it opens the door for season restrictions, specific harvest limits, permitting systems, and specifics around that kind of stuff. So and right now, I'm not saying that something doesn't have to change with the mountain lion situation, but right now they are like I just mentioned, the regulations are more focused on isolated areas, being able to regulate based on what they have going on. And I like that. I personally like that, and I think that that's better than the entire state trying to swoop in and get involved, if that makes sense. So right now, TPW's current legal framework and data systems, they're not really set up for a clean statewide mandatory reporting rule. And um, there's not enough consensus on how that rule would improve without unintended consequences. And because of that, um, the commissioners rejected it, not because they don't care about mountain lions, but because they took into account the current state of things and if this is truly something that was going to work at this time. That's not to say that this won't be back, and it wouldn't surprise me if this comes back at some point in the near future, especially given the fact that we have people like the Harts, the Harvisons, and others that are on that landscape, and again, looking for any little area that they can start chipping away at. So this is just with mountain lions right now. Mountain Lions is in Texas right now. It's a gray area, as I've kind of laid the foundation out and shown y'all. It is a gray area, and it it's an area, that being the case, it's an area that the antis, the animal rights activists, it's an area that they see vulnerable. It's an area that they see as an opportunity to impose restrictions that ultimately will lead um, to more and more, in my opinion. And I'm recalling from again from my podcast a couple of years ago with Mike Behrens. I believe the issue at the time, one of the ones we were talking about was it had something to do with trapping and a basically a requirement that if you trap a mountain lion, you have X number of hours to get there and deal with it. That is a rule that, for example, I don't necessarily have a problem with. I think it's ethical, right? Now, I believe that you should have just a moral and ethical responsibility personally, if you are a trapper, to be there within a certain amount of time and address that situation with the animal that you just trapped, right? You should not be leaving an animal in your trap for an inhumane amount of time. I think that's fair. I think as hunters and outdoorsmen, we can all agree on that. But again, the concern at the time and what Mike and I talked about on the podcast wasn't that this rule is not right. It's that, okay, if we start doing this now, what comes next? And now here we are a couple years later with even more stuff following this, even more stuff coming next. So definitely a matter to be attentive to. And again, where I was going with all of this in particular was not just that we need to be focused on mountain lions right now. You know, some of us in Texas may not have ever seen a mountain lion on our property. It might not even feel like a matter that we should really be paying attention to or a matter that's personally important to us. What should be personally important to you is the higher ranks of the TPW that are currently being influenced and infiltrated by anti-hunting extremists, animal rights activists, and people who want to chip away at your rights to hunt and fish. Because this is where it all starts. This is where it all starts. Them wiggling their way into higher ups, the voters, the people not paying attention, the voters, the people not holding their elected officials accountable. And next thing you know, we're like Colorado, where you have an entire commission, it seems like, with alternative agendas and listening to the wrong people, not listening to the voters, and you don't feel like you can win. You have to work extremely hard to gain a little bit of ground, whereas in comparison to what the anti-hunting camp is required to do. So Texans, you have to pay attention to this. This is not a matter to take lightly. This is not something to ignore. I encourage you to do your own research, to Google these names, to Google Pamela Hart, to Google Will Hart, to Google Patricia Harvison, to Google how the Texas Parks and Wildlife functions, how the commissioners are appointed, how the executive director of the TPW is appointed, and who his affiliations are with. Because you will start discovering very quickly that it is all not quite as you might expect. There are people playing. I'm going to back up on that one. Apologies. There are people who are wearing masks and cloaks and playing a game with smoke and mirrors, even within the Texas Parks and Wildlife. And if you're not careful, if you're not paying attention, it is going to come around and is going to bite all of us in the rear. We have to pay attention. It doesn't stop with mountain lions. It might start with mountain lions, but it doesn't stop with mountain lions. Because if they start chipping away with mountain lions, it's only a matter of time before next thing you know, there's seasons and regulations on wild hogs. Right now, if you are legally, if you are hunting on private property in the state of Texas, with landowner permission, with the landowner or a representative there, you technically don't even have to have a license, right? And that's something that not a lot of people have even realized in the fine print of the rules and regulations. But it's only a matter of time before hogs, coyotes, bobcats, all these other animals, we start seeing the same discussions happening about them that we're seeing happen about mountain lions. And then it starts chipping away. It starts going downhill. That's where the downhill slide begins from there. And then it gets to deer, and then it gets to turkeys, and then it gets to pronghorn, and it just keeps going. It spirals out of control. And if we don't catch it early, if we, as the hunters and outdoorsmen and women in Texas, if we don't address this early on, it will bite us in the butt. Do not let ourselves, excuse me, we cannot let ourselves go down the road of Colorado, we cannot let ourselves go down the same path that Colorado is currently going down, or other states like them, because that is going to be the end of hunting as we know it in the Lone Star State. So that's my rant and rave on what's going on in Texas. Again, my hope is that I can have a more detailed and engaging dialogue with some people in the future on the show about this specifically. Jeremy Harrison, as I mentioned at the beginning, being one. I would love to have him on the show at some point. But this is stuff to not ignore, because this is the conservation battlefield we all talk about. And guess what, guys? It is in Texas now. It is on our radar, and very few people are necessarily talking about this level of, dare I say, corruption and infiltration within the higher ranks of the TPW, because there were, certain people, certain businesses, certain organizations, they might be worried about a little bit of fallout depending on who they are and what platform they have. I'm not. I'm willing to have a respectful conversation with anybody. I'm not trying to put the Texas Parks and Wildlife itself or the 9 commissioners at the moment on blast. Because like I mentioned earlier, there's areas that I think that the Texas Parks and Wildlife is succeeding in. But as a hunter and a resident hunter in the state of Texas, I owe it to y'all, to my fellow Texans, to bring this to y'all's attention, because it's in our state now. It's not just outside looking in to a state that we might like to go to one day as a non-resident. It's here. It's here. And we have to pay attention. We have to pay attention. So some other things that I did want to talk about while I have y'all, right? While I have a captive audience with another solo podcast. We have some other matters, across the country that are worth directing some attention to. However, I'm not going to dwell on them for a great length of time. So, and just some things to keep your radar on. One that has gained some traction, we have talked about on the show before, the Oregon Peace Act. Sounds harmless, right? If you're uneducated and don't know a thing about it, but if you start looking at it, it changes some various it changes basically how some protections and stipulations in there in animal cruelty laws as it relates to like hunting and farming. So if this passes, and it looks like it's going to the ballot in November for Oregon, it's an effective ban on hunting and fishing and certain forms of farming and raising livestock in the state of Oregon. It is going to be a huge, huge change of culture, just outdoor and farming culture in Oregon if this passes, and not for the better. It is it is naive, it is an overstep, and it is dangerous, is what the Oregon Peace Act is. So they got their signatures that they needed, is my understanding, to take this to the ballot in November. So this is one that every hunter, especially those in Oregon, need to be paying attention to because you could be voting on this come November potentially. And you need to read the fine print. You need to understand exactly what this means. So the Oregon Peace Act, don't ignore it. There's always stuff going on in Colorado. I'm not going to list off all that kind of stuff in this episode, but rather I'm going to refer you to a few episodes ago when I talked. I believe it was podcast. Oh, geez. Now I got to think of the number. I believe it was 271, maybe somewhere in there with John Kessler, Colorado resident. Him and I talked about a lot of the stuff going on there right now. Some lower level things that might not be spotlighted nationally as well, but are very important nonetheless. And I encourage Texans to go listen to that because that episode, I think, paints a picture for what a game commission that has gone full corrupt is potentially doing to a state. And I don't want to see that happen in Texas. So I encourage Texans to go listen to that one and gain an understanding on what we could be in for if things go south. Um, and then there was another headline that I was compelled to bring up because I have not been able to verify this. I have, and somebody that's watching live might be able to comment on it and give more perspective, or potentially maybe later if we get more info on it, then it might we might be able to address it farther. But there was a headline that I saw, and I'll pull it up here so that I don't tell y'all wrong. I took a screenshot of it because I was like, man, that's interesting. I need to look that up. Um, this was just a gentleman on Facebook that posted this, and the headline was Trump administration shrinks grizzly habitat requirement from 25 acres to 1 acre. And in my own research, again, I'm not in a state with grizzly bears. I've never been grizzly bear hunting. So I don't know a whole lot about how this works. So I did a little bit of research and tried to figure some stuff out. Um, and I found that there is a whole lot that goes into how federal protections, mortality limits, and land management requirements are applied for grizzly bears in respective areas. I'll go on to read some more of this post saying that um, the standard scientific consensus mandated that female grizzly bears require a minimum quote unquote secure habitat patch of 25 acres free from roads and human development to safely forage. And then under new administrative guidelines, that requirement has been decimated down to just 1 acre, which I think we all can agree. And as this post goes on to explain, wildlife biologists point out that a 1 acre island of forest is not enough to safely accommodate a grizzly bear. I think we can all understand that. And this is tied specifically, this order or this uh, this requirement, what the Trump administration allegedly did, um, it's tied to the Larrabee Hat Project in Montana, um, which I believe this essentially comes down to being a way for big logging projects to work their way into areas they haven't been before because of restrictions like this on, hey, this much space is required for a wildlife habitat in this context. And what this says is that a newly filed federal lawsuit exposed this quiet shift in wildlife policy. So again, in my own research, I haven't really been able to verify that this is a legitimate thing. It based on what social media says, it seems legitimate. You get on Google and I don't know. I haven't been given the warm and fuzzies to say that yes, this is happening. But this is definitely something to keep our eye on and to pay attention to if this does become a thing, because it would, in my mind, warrant another overreach of government in regards to um, wildlife and land management policies, because it is all in the name of infrastructure. It's all in the name of logging. It's all in the name of doing all these things with no regard for hunting, fishing, and wildlife. And seemingly, as this Facebook post will make it sound, it goes against, and I would believe it, it goes against wildlife biologists and their recommendations for what is best for these animals for science-based wildlife management. You start putting roads and people and boxing around grizzly bears more and boxing in more bears, you're going to see probably more bear attacks. You're probably going to see more bears killed. You're going to see a lot more incidences one way or the other involving grizzly bears. So again, I won't dwell on it for too long, just because again, I would consider this unverified. So do your own Google search on it and see what you can come up with. But this is definitely something that would fall under everything else that this administration seems to be doing to try and um, give us more resources and more infrastructure for the American dream, but at a blatant disregard for wildlife and science-based land and wildlife management. So keep your eyes on this one, folks. Something to pay attention to. Bears, just in general, man, it is such an interesting topic, and it's something that a lot of people I don't feel like fully understand. And proof of that would be even a recent situation with the country music singer, the entertainer of the year, even Cody Johnson. He goes right after he wins entertainer of the year, he goes on a 10-day Alaskan bear hunting trip and kills a mammoth of a grizzly bear. And as you would expect with any celebrity that goes out and does something like this, he starts getting some negative feedback about it, or at least that's what the headlines want you to believe. You start searching, excuse me, searching Cody Johnson and Bear, and all of a sudden, all these things start popping up about, you know, Cody Johnson getting backlash for shooting this bear and all this kind of stuff. And I don't know, the way I look at it, one, most of Cody Johnson, just knowing him as a country singer and knowing who he is openly and very blatantly a hunter and an outdoorsman. He, I would imagine that a lot of his supporters probably don't have a problem with this, probably don't have any issue with it. Um, and what you're hearing, if you are even hearing anything other than the noise of the media, if there are actually people out there who have a problem with this, it's a very vocal minority, as is the case with a lot of this stuff, I feel like. And people who are vocal about that kind of thing, vocal about bear hunting and being opposed to it, they're uneducated. They don't understand. And they're very naive in his regard to country music. And if I guarantee you, if they started looking at their list of favorite artists, they would probably be be displeased to find that most, if not all of them, hunt and fish or do something in that regard. Because for those people, for individuals like Cody Johnson, it's just as much a way of life for them as it is you and me. And I was really not surprised, but very pleased with what I came across when looking this up, because I see, like everyone else, I see, oh my goodness, he just killed a huge bear. I was super happy for him. I was excited. I was pumped. I was like, man, that would be cool. That looks like a cool hunt. And he did an interview, an ACC exclusive interview, and in just like a minute, he talked about some things that I think people need to realize. And this is in regards to bear, but he was very well articulated and specific with his discussion on how these are predators. These are bears are a natural predator. The populations need to be controlled. That was the purpose of this hunt. He talked about how a male grizzly bear can eat or kill, over 150 calves like caribou and moose calves per year, and how he'll kill grizzly cubs if the mom is around just to get her to go back and heat as well. Um, and then you also come into a safety factor for Alaskan communities and stuff like that. And you have an animal like this. Yes, it's a bear, um, but an animal like this, left uncontrolled, will take over. This is an ultimate predator. There are no other predators out there in most parts of the world for bears like this. You start narrowing it down and looking at other areas, other parts of the world. Texas, when it comes to mountain lions and even coyotes in some places like that, what are their predators? We are. Wolves, bears, all of these animals, what are their natural predators? There are none, or very few, or few and far between, or their own predator is themselves, essentially. This is where conservation is hunting. This is where us stepping up to the plate and managing populations through hunting is conservation. It's not a kill fest. It's not going out there and just being a redneck with a weapon and going to town on them like the antis would want us to believe. It is a strategic and science-based process to regulate these populations. And Cody even talked about that on how this was essentially, I believe he described it as a bear, as a conservation hunt and a meat hunt. He harvested the meat too, which just goes to show that he's being responsible in that regard. It's not a trophy hunt. Yes, I would consider it a trophy bear, don't get me wrong, but he's not going out there for sport at the same time. He's a hunter and outdoorsman and loves to do it. As do most people in his line of work in his field, I would say, as most of all of us do. So, and that's where it comes down to educating, and he set a good example for us that I believe we should follow, educating others on the importance of on why hunts like this exist, why regulated hunting and trapping of bears and all these predators is important, why we need to pay attention in Texas when it comes to what kind of restrictions and regulations are we going to allow to be imposed on mountain lions without, contacting our elected officials and raising concern about how the commission is doing this. All of these things, they all play a part in the model and what we are trying to achieve right here. And it starts with us being focused on it. It starts with us not just purchasing a hunting license and going out there enjoying the woods. That's the reward at the end of it, I would say. Being able to purchase your license and go out there, enjoy the great outdoors, hunt, provide meat for your table, and spend time and make memories in the woods with family and friends. That's the reward at the end of it. The work before it, there's two forms of it. There's the work that you invest blood, sweat, and tears, manual labor into your own corner of the wildlife management world, whatever that is, whether you have 100 acres, 10 acres, or 1,000 acres. Your management efforts obviously are physical and the work that you feel on the day to day. The other side of it is the conservation. And there's different forms of that. The manual labor that you put into your place, that is conservation. That is managing your wildlife. The other side of it is advocating for others. The other side of it is advocating for your right to hunt and fish, whatever state that might be in. That's where the battlefield um, is focused on right now. And social media is a blessing and a curse. We've talked about that before, but it is a valuable tool more than ever in this fight, and us being able to spread the word and share given issues like this one with other hunters and like-minded individuals because it's important and we need more people to get involved. If we just sit by and stay in our own little corner, even though we are putting in the work and boots on the ground, it's not enough because the activists and the extremists and the antis and the people who want to watch the world burn, they're coming. They're coming and they're chipping away at it one rule and one regulation, one petition at a time. We're seeing it in Texas, of all places. And it's not going to go away on its own. It's not going to go away without each and every person getting involved. And so that's my call to you guys, as normally is at this stage in my podcast episodes where I'm on here doing a solo, is to get involved, to plug in, engage, and pay attention. And like everything else, it's never been easier because of the online world and digital media and organizations like Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, BHA, Howl for Wildlife. I plug them every time I do this, it seems, but it's because I personally use their action tabs. I am not sponsored by these folks. They are not paying me a dime to say this, guys. I promise you. These are just resources that I have found useful as a hunter and outdoorsman. Go to their websites. Again, Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, Howl for Wildlife. Go to their action tabs, and you can see everything that they have on there for you guys to get involved in. Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, you can even select your own state, and it will show you current issues in that state. And then another thing that we are trying to do, just because this is something that is near and dear to us here at Fall Obsession, is we're trying to get more plugged in with this in our own website. And it is not built yet. It is not ready to roll out yet. But we are going to be bringing a conservation platform to our Fall Obsession webpage as well, where you guys can go to see all the current issues that are going on in various states. We have hunters and outdoorsmen spread out throughout the country, and we're going to utilize that to also put a spotlight on given issues in different areas that might not be as highlighted as Colorado or Oregon, etc. So we're working on that. But in the meantime, please go to those other two places. There's also some other pages you can follow on social media. Obviously, the BHA and How for Wildlife pages on social media will give you plenty of info. But then there's another page. I'll plug this guy. We've had him on the podcast before, Eddie Boyer. His handle is Rags to Ridges on Instagram. He's posting almost daily, it seems like, with various conservation issues. And he's very blunt. He's very open and honest about everything. He doesn't sugarcoat anything for you guys. So dive in with him. He's got a lot of great stuff. And then even the page Outdoor Life, they post a lot of just headlines and information about current conservation issues that are going on. If you want to stay plugged in with more Texas related stuff, make sure you're following not only us, but Cable Smith, the Lone Star Outdoor Show. He's got a lot of stuff on Instagram on a regular basis. He covers these issues quite frequently. He's been covering the same stuff that I've been talking about in this podcast, and he's better at it than me. So you get a pretty thorough walkthrough with him. But my challenge to you guys as we wrap this one up is just to stay plugged in, pay attention, hold your state officials, your politicians, the politicians who control your game commission, hold them accountable, vote in your local elections. And then this summer, take it upon yourself to participate or do something, do one thing in or for conservation, wildlife conservation, public lands protection, science-based wildlife management, whatever it might be, that you haven't done before. It might look different for everybody. It might be, boots on the ground, getting involved with a local organization and doing work in your local community. Or for some of you, it might be taking that step to actually go to one of these websites I just listed and fill out an action tab. That might be what it looks like for you. And if that is, that's great. Do it. We need you to do it. So get plugged in, guys. Stay involved. Stay vigilant, and don't let the antis and the activists creep in and take away the thing that we all know and love and find near and dear to our hearts just because we were lazy and we didn't feel like it was worth it, or we considered it not our problem, because it is our problem. It's each and every one of our problem. If you think it's not your problem, you're naive, you're ignorant, and I'm sorry for saying it, you're just lazy. You have to get involved and you have to stay plugged in. So thank you guys for sticking with me for another solo. Hope this one was engaging from a standpoint of, I know it's just me talking, I shouldn't say engaging, but I hope that this one was productive and educational for you guys and that y'all took something away from this. Make sure you share the episode with others that need to hear it, with others that need to get involved. And if you have questions, if you have comments, if you think I misspoke on something, send us a message on social media. We would love to discuss it with you. We'd love to further this conversation. So we're always open to that, always open to those constructive conversations. So thanks for listening to another Follow Up Session podcast. My name is Sam Thrash, and I will be back with you guys again next week for another episode.